A black family boarded a first-class flight like any other passenger, but within minutes, they were being ordered off the plane by a flight attendant who thought they didn't belong. What she didn't know, the man she was kicking out was the owner of the entire airline, and what happened next left the whole plane in shock. It was a bright morning at LAX. The sun filtered through the giant glass windows of Terminal B, casting golden streaks across the glossy floors. Passengers bustled about, some dragging carry-ons behind them, others sipping coffee or scrolling through their phones as boarding announcements echoed through the terminal. Gate 42 was now boarding, a flight to New York. Among the travelers was the Johnson family, Marcus, Layla, and their two young children, ages 7 and 10. They walked calmly toward the jet bridge, first-class tickets in hand, boarding with smiles and excitement. It was a rare family trip that combined business with a little bit of vacation. Once on board, they were greeted by a few polite nods from the flight crew. But then came her, the flight attendant stationed at the front of the plane, arms crossed, eyes narrow. From the moment she saw the Johnsons, something shifted in her demeanor. Her posture stiffened, and her warm welcome turned cold. As the family placed their bags in the overhead bin and settled into their plush first-class seats, she approached. "Excuse me," she snapped, her tone sharp and icy. "You need to step off the plane. Immediately." Marcus blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" The attendant crossed her arms. "There's an issue with your seating. You're going to need to leave the plane while we sort it out." Layla looked around. "We're in the right seats. 2A and 2B for us, and the kids in 3A and 3B. The attendant's face tightened. "Well, I'm telling you there's a problem. And frankly," she added, voice rising just enough for nearby passengers to hear, "your attitude is making other passengers uncomfortable." Now other heads began turning. A woman in 1C raised an eyebrow. A businessman behind the Johnsons looked up from his laptop. A few passengers leaned toward the aisle, trying to see what was going on. The Johnsons exchanged glances. "Attitude?" Marcus asked calmly. "All we did was sit down." The flight attendant raised a walkie-talkie to her mouth and stepped aside, muttering into it. "We've got a situation here. I might need security to remove a disruptive passenger." Layla's eyes widened. "Disruptive? We haven't even spoken since boarding." The children clung to their tablets, sensing the tension, but not fully understanding it. One whispered, "Mom, are we getting kicked off?" Passengers began murmuring. Some pulled out their phones. The atmosphere shifted from normal to uneasy. One man muttered, "This doesn't feel right." And it wasn't, because the Johnsons had done nothing wrong. Their tickets were valid. Their behavior calm. Their only offense, being a black family in first class. Still seated, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his ticket, and held it out to the attendant. "Look," he said, voice firm but respectful. "We are right where we're supposed to be." The attendant barely glanced at the ticket. "This isn't up for debate. Either step off the aircraft now, or I will have you escorted off." Passengers around them watched in disbelief. One woman whispered, "They didn't do anything." A young man nearby had already started recording on his phone. "I'm not stepping off," Marcus said, standing up slowly. "We paid for these seats. My children are tired. We followed every rule. What's the real issue here?" Her eyes flared for a moment, maybe in panic, maybe in frustration, but she said nothing. Then, suddenly, the flight supervisor came rushing in from the jet bridge. A whisper had reached the gate. Something was off. Something big. "Sir, may I see your ticket?" the supervisor asked. Marcus handed it to him calmly. The supervisor scanned the name. His eyes widened slightly. Then he looked up, really looked at Marcus, and instantly recognized the face. He stepped aside and asked quietly, "Are you Marcus Johnson, CEO of Skylux Airways?" Marcus gave a slow nod. "That's me." The flight supervisor's face went pale. He turned toward the flight attendant. "We need to talk. Now." The Johnson family remained seated, the children wide-eyed. The tension in the cabin broke, like a sudden drop in turbulence. Passengers began whispering again, but this time with recognition. Someone said aloud, "Wait, he owns the airline?" And just like that, everything flipped. The same woman who tried to throw the Johnsons off the plane now stood frozen, realizing her career might have just crashed before takeoff. What she didn't know when she made her snap judgment was that she was talking to the man who signs her paycheck. The man she tried to remove was the man who built the airline. What the flight attendant failed to recognize, in her rush to judge, to assume, to discriminate, was that Marcus Johnson wasn't just any traveler. This wasn't a case of a passenger sneaking into first class. This wasn't a mix-up of seat assignments or unruly behavior. No, the man she was trying to push off the plane was the man who made the plane possible. Marcus D. Johnson was the founder and CEO of Skylux Airways, the very airline she was working for. At just 39 years old, Marcus had become one of the youngest, most successful black executives in the aviation industry. But his journey to that cockpit of power didn't come easily. From homeless teen to airline tycoon born and raised in the inner city of Chicago, Marcus didn't grow up with privilege or connections. In fact, he spent part of his teenage years homeless, sleeping in shelters and studying by streetlight. His mother worked 2 jobs, and his father wasn't in the picture. But Marcus had something that no hardship could take from him: vision. He was obsessed with planes from a young age. While his classmates played video games, Marcus read books on aviation, engineering, and business. His dream? To not just fly planes, but to own the skies. He got his first airport job at 17, cleaning aircraft and loading baggage at O'Hare. While others clocked out and headed home, Marcus stayed late, asking questions, studying procedures, volunteering for extra shifts. He didn't just want to do his job. He wanted to learn everything. Over the next decade, Marcus climbed the ladder: gate agent, operations supervisor, flight logistics manager. By 30, he had helped restructure an entire regional airline's operations, saving them millions. But he was tired of the way traditional airlines treated people, especially people who looked like him. Skylux was born with a mission. With every promotion Marcus saved, every dollar went into a bigger dream. And finally, after years of planning and fundraising, Skylux Airways was born. Not just another airline, but a company with a mission: to deliver world-class service while championing dignity, equality, and respect for both passengers and crew. It wasn't just about planes. It was about changing the culture of aviation. Marcus made it a policy that every customer, no matter their background, was to be treated with kindness and professionalism. And it wasn't just lip service. Marcus walked the talk. He regularly flew on his own airline, not in a flashy CEO way, but quietly, anonymously. He booked regular tickets under a generic name and would travel in coach or first class without ever announcing who he was. Why? Because Marcus believed in experiencing the airline the way any passenger would. He wanted to know what was working, and more importantly, what wasn't. He called it his silent inspections. It was one of those inspections that had brought him, along with his wife, Layla, and their 2 kids, onto this flight. Assumption over evidence, but none of that mattered to the flight attendant. To her, Marcus wasn't a visionary. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't even a person of significance. He was just another black man in a place she didn't think he belonged. She saw his skin color before she saw his seat number. She judged his presence before hearing his story. And in doing so, she made one of the most damaging mistakes a service professional can make. She assumed. She assumed he was in the wrong. She assumed his calmness was arrogance. She assumed that his family didn't fit the first-class image. And by the time she realized the truth, it was too late. A lesson bigger than one flight. Marcus didn't need to yell. He didn't need to raise his voice or flash his credentials. All he had to do was hand over his business card, the one with the unmistakable title, founder and CEO. Skylux Airways. The shift in the room was instant. Gasps. Silence. Then shame. The flight attendant, who moments earlier had been confidently demanding that Marcus leave the plane, was now speechless, because in her rush to assert authority, she had unknowingly tried to throw the owner of the airline off his own aircraft. But Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't retaliate. He simply looked at her and said nothing, because sometimes silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. You're not flying on this plane. The air inside the aircraft grew thick with tension. Marcus Johnson sat upright in his first-class seat, hands calm but voice firm, trying to reason with the increasingly aggressive flight attendant. His 2 children sat quietly beside him, eyes wide with confusion. His wife, Layla, gripped the armrest, staying composed, but her jaw was clenched. "There must be a misunderstanding," Marcus said again, steady and respectful. "We're in the right seats. These were booked well in advance." But the flight attendant didn't back down. If anything, her attitude intensified. "I don't care who you think you are," she snapped, with narrowed eyes. "You're not flying on this plane." The words rang out sharply, louder than they needed to be, and that was intentional. She wanted other passengers to hear. She wanted to make a point, and she did. People in the nearby rows began glancing over their seats. Some froze mid-sentence. A few took out their phones, quietly hitting record. The sound of rustling fabric, hushed whispers, and camera clicks filled the cabin. One woman across the aisle looked up in disbelief. "Wait, what's going on?" she whispered to her husband. Marcus kept his tone level. "I paid for these seats like everyone else. We have valid tickets, and we haven't caused any disruption. I deserve to be treated with respect." But the attendant was beyond listening. "You're being combative," she declared, almost triumphantly. "If you don't step off this aircraft voluntarily, I'll call security." Her voice had the kind of tone that implied danger, not for Marcus, but about him, like she was positioning him as a threat, as someone who needed to be removed. And that's when passengers began reacting more openly. "That's not right," said a young man in row 4. "He hasn't even raised his voice." "This is wrong," said another woman, shaking her head. "They're just sitting with their kids." A couple even stood up in solidarity. "This is racial profiling, pure and simple." But it didn't matter. The flight attendant stepped toward the front of the plane and radioed for security. Within moments, 2 uniformed airport officers stepped onto the aircraft. The cabin hushed. All eyes turned to Marcus. He sighed, not out of fear, not because he was cornered, but because this wasn't new. It wasn't the first time he'd been judged by the color of his skin. It wasn't the first time someone mistook his calm confidence for aggression. And sadly, it likely wouldn't be the last. But what the flight attendant, and even the security officers, didn't realize was that they were seconds away from learning exactly who Marcus Johnson was. Slowly, Marcus reached into his leather briefcase. He didn't pull out a phone. He didn't flash a badge. Instead, he handed a simple white card to the flight supervisor, who had just arrived after being alerted to the escalating situation. The supervisor took the card, casually at first, until he read the name. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face. He looked at the card again, as if trying to confirm what he just saw. Marcus D., Johnson founder and CEO. Skylux Airways. A silence swept over the front of the plane. The supervisor looked up slowly, meeting Marcus's calm but piercing gaze. "Sir, I apologize. I didn't realize," he turned toward the flight attendant, whose face still held defiance, until she caught the supervisor's expression. "What is it?" she asked. "Is there an issue?" The supervisor pulled her aside, lowered his voice, but not quite enough. Passengers could still hear snippets. "That's the CEO, the owner. You just tried to remove the man who owns this airline." Suddenly, the entire aircraft shifted from tension to shock. The same passengers who had been unsure and nervous, confused, now looked on with disbelief. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "He owns the airline." "You're kidding. That's the CEO." The flight attendant stepped back, her face pale now. I didn't know. I thought." Marcus stood up slowly, keeping his composure. His children looked at him with quiet pride. "You thought we didn't belong here," Layla said, voice calm but cutting. "And that was enough for you." The flight supervisor begged Marcus to stay on the flight, offering to personally ensure their comfort. But Marcus raised a hand. "No, we'll take the next one," he said. "But when I return to headquarters, we will absolutely be having a conversation about training, conduct, and the values this airline stands for." He looked around the cabin, at the passengers who had supported him, at the ones who stayed silent, and finally, at the flight attendant who now stood speechless. "Because this," Marcus added, "isn't just about us. It's about how many people go through this kind of treatment every single day without a voice. He turned to gather his things, his family close behind, and as they exited the aircraft, one passenger summed it up best. She tried to remove the boss and ended up exposing herself. When truth lands harder than a plane suddenly, everything changed. The moment the supervisor read the name on the card, Marcus D. Johnson, founder and CEO of Skylux Airways, the balance of power shifted instantly. The authority the flight attendant had clung to so tightly was gone. Her smugness vanished like mist under a spotlight. She looked at the supervisor, confused, as he leaned in and whispered urgently. His voice was low, but the few words that passengers overheard were more than enough. He owns the airline. The flight attendant's face drained of color. Her confident stance melted into unease. Red crept across her cheeks, not from heat, but from shame. I didn't know, she stammered, her eyes darting between Marcus and the supervisor. I thought. Layla, composed but fierce, stepped forward. You thought we didn't belong here, she said coolly. That much is clear. The moment struck like lightning. For a second, there was only silence. Then, a single clap from a passenger in row 4. Then another. Then more. Applause broke out like thunder across the cabin. One passenger shouted, "That's what happens when you judge a book by its cover." Others nodded, murmuring support. Even those who had remained quiet earlier couldn't help but respond now. The truth was out, and the injustice had been exposed for everyone to see. The apology that came too late, the supervisor turned to Marcus, mortified. "Mr. Johnson, on behalf of Skylux, I offer my deepest apologies. This is not how we train our staff to treat passengers, especially not our CEO." But Marcus wasn't looking for apologies. His focus was steady, his voice calm, but there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. "This isn't about me being CEO," Marcus said. "It's about how easily someone with less power, someone without a title or a platform, could be treated the same way, or worse." And no one would have said a word. The supervisor's head lowered slightly. He nodded. "Please," he said, "let me personally make this right. Let us fly you and your family to New York, first class, with our sincerest service." But Marcus had already made his decision. "No," he said quietly. "We'll take a later flight. Right now, my priority is my family's peace, not your PR cleanup." There was no anger in his voice, no shouting, just quiet disappointment. "But when I get back to headquarters," he continued, "we're going to have a serious conversation about training, about accountability, and about the values we claim to stand for." His words didn't need volume. They carried weight, the kind that lingers long after the moment passes. A reputation in turbulence, the flight attendant stood frozen, unable to meet anyone's eyes. She wasn't just embarrassed, she was exposed. Because what she had done wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't a bad day. It was a mindset, one that judged people not by their conduct, but by their color. And now, that mindset had just cost her far more than a few awkward moments. Her job was on the line. Her reputation was shattered. In an age where camera phones recorded everything and social media moved faster than any airplane, her actions were already being posted, shared, and condemned. As the Johnsons calmly gathered their belongings and began exiting the aircraft, people stepped aside, parting like a curtain. Some nodded in respect. Others offered quiet apologies of their own. Marcus gave him a polite smile, not out of ego, but humility. He wasn't walking off defeated. He was walking off with dignity. And for his children, who follow behind, they had just witnessed a moment more valuable than any business lesson or school lecture. They saw what it meant to stand up, not by force, but by grace. To rise above, not by shouting, but by simply showing who you are. The bigger picture as the cabin door closed behind them, passengers remained silent for a moment, reflecting. Because what had just unfolded wasn't just a confrontation, it was a lesson. A reminder that bias doesn't always come in loud words or blatant actions. Sometimes it hides in assumptions, in tones, in dismissals. But when it's brought to light, like it was that day, it becomes impossible to ignore. And for the flight attendant, she was left standing in the aisle, realizing too late that judging someone by how they look might just cost her everything she thought she controlled. The story went viral. By the time Marcus landed later that evening, news outlets were already reporting on the incident. Videos of the confrontation flooded social media, sparking debates on racial profiling and customer service ethics in the airline industry. Skylux Airways released a statement the next day. "We do not tolerate discrimination of any kind. The employee involved has been suspended pending a full investigation. We are reviewing our training and policies to ensure all customers are treated with dignity and respect." Marcus appeared in an interview shortly after, where he said, "This wasn't about ego. It was about how easily bias can cloud judgment. My family didn't deserve that treatment, and neither does anyone else." He used the incident as a wake-up call for the industry, launching a new initiative within Skylux focused on diversity training, empathy development, and frontline accountability. But for millions watching the story unfold, one thing became crystal clear. Never assume someone's worth based on how they look, because the person you're mistreating today might just be the one signing your paycheck tomorrow. What would you have done if you were in the Johnson's shoes? Let us know in the comments. And remember, respect should never be earned by power. It should be given to everyone equally. Subscribe for more stories that make you think.